There we go. What is up, guys? And welcome to a radformational video on the Rad Potential YouTube channel. We haven't had one of these more specific radformational videos in a while, so this is the down and dirty, learning stuff, in addition to getting a few things done on the race car. So, what are we going over today? We are going to go over installing and outlining a few of the different connectors and where things go on your GSL-SE RX7 engine wiring harness. So, yes, that's about as specific as saying that you have the fastest 1968 Pontiac on a Tuesday in Oklahoma. But, hey, somebody needs to know this stuff. So, we're going to document it for you. Alright, so this is the engine harness here. You can see we got stuff going all over the place despite not being able to see my head in this clip. But what's important to note is that your engine harness is separate from the body harness on your car. So, although this harness is going to connect to the body harness in certain ways, it does not and is not the same thing. This one's removable. If you don't plan on taking your car completely apart, there's no chance you're getting the body harness out. It literally is one piece under the dash, the fuse block's all built in, everything. But your engine harness, on the other hand, a whole other story. So, on a GSL-SE RX7, the car is fuel injected. And you might say, well, what the heck? It's a first gen. Didn't they all have carburetors? Well, yes, majority of them did. GSL-SEs, the only ones that had a 13B, and that are fuel injected, unless they're swapped or some aftermarket kit. So, GSL-SE injection shows the re-egi on the top, and it is a very simple, man, I'm like really blurring this thing up with this light, kind of sort of ish better. Alright, so the GSL-SE fuel injection is probably one of the most simple fuel injection systems you could ever install or use or whatever on your car. It's a swap you can do on like an S4 13B. You could put that on there, S5 13B. You could put the SE fuel injection on it and run it in your first gen. It's pretty easy to use. So, this setup, the GSL-SE stuff, does not control ignition at all. It is simply fuel control. The wiring for your coils and everything like that, right here, the distributor, and all that stuff is the exact same as like a 1984, 1983, the whole deal 12A. It's all the same. So, when you go to, want to put this in your 12A car, it's pretty easy to hook up. So, what you'd want to do doing the swap, just look up the pinouts for the ECU and see where you need to send power and stuff, much like hooking up a standalone. So, looking at this harness, you've got an end that has some big plugs on it here, some big orange ones, some extra stuff, some other extra stuff. You have a lovely hole right there. So, all of this stuff needs to go through that hole. You're going to see a little nice factory grommet here, some plugs down here near the grommet, an extra piece of little wiring sticking off right here, which we actually don't need for this application, but I didn't strip it off the harness. I'm actually just going to tuck it in, maybe. I don't know. Maybe we'll cut it off. But basically, starting here, we'll go forward. So this yellow connector connects into the body harness. I'm going to assume it's some sort of TAC communication of sorts right here. It's going to plug in there. This 3-prong connector here, I do not have a place to plug that in on this car, but this could be a cruise control add-on in addition to the cruise control information that's coming from this part here. So as you move further down the harness, this long one here that's sticking off, on the later model first gens, right here, these two rubber pieces that are broken on mine and I need to take off the firewall, would house 2 control solenoids for vacuum. Much like the solenoid rack that's on your engine, there's a couple of them that are mounted off to the side. And they pull vacuum from the engine and I think run vacuum up to the cruise control, and then might be as well like a sensor or something like that for the AC. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, which on this sort of stuff it very well could be with the like weird vacuum names and what they all do. I just know that there's 2 solenoids on the firewall that hook into those wires. So, moving further down the list, here, this harness is going to route itself. It's going to route itself underneath your charcoal canister here, which has no electric anything. And the next part of the harness we're going to talk about is this bit right here. This, as I've interpreted and learned is something that you never, ever adjust. That's just what I've been told. Never touch it. They're set up and tuned. It's a fuel trim kind of deal, and it's kind of set up and tuned to match with the throttle body you have and the, I don't know. I've just never turned on one ever and never really had a need to, because GSL-SEs have generally just worked. So if you've had success with making your car run better or be less prone to flooding or anything like that with adjusting that knob, comment below, because I want to know what it does. You have this covered plug here is a male plug. It looks like it's covered. It is colored, right? So the colored plugs are generally diagnostic plugs and not plugs that actually get plugged into anything unless you have a match for one like this side here, but that's a different story. In this area is generally your diagnostic area. So the yellow plug here, I think that might be a fuel pump trip, so you can bridge those two and the fuel pump comes on. The green one could also suffice for that, but I know with these old ones there was a little bit of diagnostic you're able to do with it. I'm not entirely sure. This circular one is what plugs into the fuel trim thing. These deals here, this little male harness is just as part of the body harness, but this male harness actually goes to your turn signal stuff. So I think that's completely separate. I don't see anything here that needs to go into that zone. Alright, moving to the engine side of things, or I guess we skipped a big one, literally. This is the mass airflow sensor plug. It's the only plug like this on the entire car. Notice it does have a metal little snap dealy whopper on it, and if you're not careful taking this on or off, you will break the edges of this clip. So make sure you pull up on the little metal trim piece here to unclip it. So moving across to the engine now. This two-prong plug, the first one you see, is going to go to the idle air or the BAC. I think this is the BAC down here. So it's going to go down here to this BAC. There's just a simple two-prong plug. This is a very common deal on RX7s. You see these everywhere. This three-prong guy is your TPS right here, throttle position sensor. As you come in further, you're going to have a plug that looks like an injector clip but isn't. So right here, this green one, plugs into the back of your water pump, and that is the coolant temperature sensor for the ECU. These can fail, and these can cause erratic fueling on your car. So just notice, or I guess note that if you're having trouble, maybe try a different coolant temp sensor if you have one available to you. The next two bits on here that come off by the coolant temp sensor, or three we'll say, as you can see these are form fit to fit the engine. These are your injectors. So primary and secondary. The secondary, or I say primary and secondary. Primary injectors only on a GSL-SE, but rotor 1 and rotor 2. You can see that they are, of different lengths. Obviously the shorter one is rotor 1, the longer one is rotor 2. This singular plug here, this blade, sometimes it's a circular looking thing. This is your O2 sensor. On a GSL-SE, it is a one-wire O2 sensor. As far as I know, you need it. The ECU does read from that to know when to turn things on and off, I would say, for emissions and this, that, and the other. If stuff's getting hot, it can recirculate, etc. But that plug, this wire, actually runs next to the fuel rail and then comes down the back of the intake. And on these, the O2 sensor would have sat right here on that manifold. Actually, the cast manifold. So I'll have a header which has that O2 sensor in it, but it's further down, so that wire has been extended from here down. So there's your engine harness stuff. Now, moving across to this side. I do believe that this car has had the air temp sensor broken, which is why these two wires are this. But I'm going to have to confirm that when I actually go to put this together. These colored solenoids and this stuff here is emissions controls. So these are recirculation solenoids for like the EGR and the little blow-off valve thing that goes back here. Grounds obviously get grounded to the intake and to the block. You'll have one, you should like to put one right here, and then you can put one, there's actually a factory ground that would go right here. It's like a little plastic box. Let me show you that. This guy. Here, we'll just get this factory unmodified intake out of here. Okay, this guy. So this is actually a ground as well. It's just some resistor styled little box looking thing. Those two wires come down off of it. and go into there. Now, you'll see this big unit, which I don't have on the other one, but I do have on this one. This is the idle air control valve, and it has a 2-prong wire coming off of it. What I was mentioning with those 2 wires that I have that are broken on my harness, and I'm pretty sure, is that this is your air temp sensor, the black one. And if you notice on this harness that I do not have a black plug on here, but I do have these 2 wires that come off in that zone. So I'm pretty sure, 95.99% sure, that these 2 wires were plugged in to my air temp sensor right here. So just note that for what it's worth. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this harness through the firewall. And actually, before we go ahead and do that, while I got your attention, if you're still here, this is the ECU rack for a GSL-SE, okay? This big guy is your atmospheric temperature sensor, or atmospheric pressure sensor. All right, I don't know that I've ever necessarily seen one of these fail, but it's here under the floor. This is the main relay that turns on. I'll put the diagram in for the whole car, a little picture here. You can pause it, that I found on the internet a long time ago and saved. It's just called like a main circuit relay. So I think that this turns on, like your ECU turns on, your fuel pump controls and stuff like that. Maybe I would have to check, but that's what I know this is named. This is an emissions control module circuit opener thingy. Yeah, words and stuff, but this is something to do with the emissions. Generally, like this car, it's going to have that plugged in, but I don't necessarily think it does anything. You have these 2 big plugs on the ECU, which are pretty self-explanatory. GSL-SEs are 304. So in 304 is like Mazda's way of telling you what series stuff comes from. So like for an S4 in A, you have in 326. For an S5 NA, you have in 351, S5 turbos in 370. You get the picture. They all have their different series numbers. So, like on a GSL-SE engine, you run an N304 flywheel. So they mark their ECUs in a similar fashion. For example, has anybody ever had a grappling hook fall off of your shelf while you grab an ECU from a S5 RX7 convertible, which is in 53 because it was an automatic? I have. All right. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and shove this harness in here and just kind of show you guys where everything's laid and how it kind of runs out and plug some stuff in. And yeah, always something. Bam. So now the intake's ready to get put back on. Alright, so now we get to brave a very squeaky RX7 door. Cover your ears. And since we have a nice, fresh, painted engine location down here, the ECU rack can get laid in. So the main engine harness comes in. There's a nice little metal hooker thing right here to hook your daily whopper into. This is not really going to fit yet, but you'll plug in. Use this harness. It's not really one to fit. Alright, so we'll plug in the main big daddies for the ECU here and here. I hope you guys can see this. Then you've got this little guy here, the separate harness that comes out and plugs into all the stuff on this side for the most part. So you can see this guy right there, this big guy right here. Now, you're going to be like, oh, whoa, whoa, there's more wires over here. Yes, there is, and I'll show you why. Okay, so don't just try to yank your engine harness out of the car without coming under here and investigating a wee bit further than what you see on the ECU rack, okay? There's a whole bunch of other wires that are going to be hooked into this over here. So, the main relay actually doesn't hook in to the engine harness. The main relay hooks in to the body harness right here. Whoop-pow. Just like that. Click. This comes from the body harness, this big dealio. Now, you're going to see this big fat connector and this big fat connector that came from the engine harness. Look at that. They match up. Flip one over. Okay. So, what? Oh, I'm backwards. This way. Okay, they match up. So, the engine harness connects to the body harness. This whole little body harness thing is typically routed up flat, back up in here, and that flat piece goes there and all that and the other. Mine is going to look like this. I'm going to kind of just have all this tucked under here, and it's going to come straight down because I didn't want to route it up there while I was in there doing things and stuff. Okay, now, there's a whole nother section of this body harness too, which I don't think these get plugged into. There's actually, on some of them, there's some little, like, controllers over here that these could possibly go to, but I do think that there is a plug. Oh, wait, there's more. That's going to come out here. Okay, I was wrong. These are just for the fan controls and stuff. So you got this one here, which is a little more of a car wiring thing, but this plug here actually goes on your fan controller right here on the outside. The rest of these kind of go up into the top. There's some funky looking shaped ones and stuff, but these will actually go up in here and they're going to connect up on the back side of this. There's some more plugs, if I recall. So, more for a little bit further down the road. I do have to, so now that the engine harness is in and hooked up and you guys have a general understanding of where it goes, what things are getting plugged into what, and the general layout of it. And I apologize, I don't have like specific thermo resistor for injector number 6 terms, but that was terrible. At least there's some good knowledge there for you to watch and see where things are going, etc., etc. The next thing that I've got to do to the race car, so super stoked you made this far in the video and learned something from putting your engine harness in if you have a GSL-SE. The next part, I guess, of the race car video here is I need to lay in the rest of the wiring on the inside of the car. So the battery is mounted behind the passenger seat. I've got a whole bunch of big red cable that I took out of the car. I've got a big red like master kill for a tractor switch that's going to get stuck into the new LRB speed console delete or center console filler panel. And I'll show you guys how to put the main kill in the car so that way when you kick it off, it shuts everything down. Had to wire up my yellow race car the same way, etc., etc., so that shouldn't be too hard. This car should maintain the original wiring for the fuel pump, all that stuff, so it is not a constant running fuel pump. Most racing sanctioning bodies these days, I know this is like a little bit of an aside, but most racing sanctioning bodies won't let you run your fuel pump full time on a switch. It has to be engine or ignition shut off to kill the fuel pump, because if you crash your car, go look at when Ken Block crashed his RS Cosworth or his Kazi and the car flipped over. The wiring wasn't done like that because that was an older build, and the fuel pump stayed on, pumped the engine bay full of fuel, and that car burned up. So that's one thing you don't want to happen to your car if you crash it, especially if you're in it and trying to get out. Racing seats and harnesses and stuff aren't the easiest things to get out of fast. So keep that in mind too. This should maintain all that stuff. Right now, we're to the last 30%. Takes a lot of the time. If you really go back and look at how long we've been working on this car, I just had this conversation with one of my coworkers. I think we took this car and put it on the rotisserie in November? So it's the end of January. So we've really only been after this for 3 months, which I think is pretty dang good. For it not being a full-time job, it not being like number one priority, still working on the truck and other stuff, going to events, going to Cars and Coffee and just, living a regular life and being able to work on the car. So I'm pretty stoked to have got it done this far. I'm pretty stoked for you guys to keep watching the videos. So thank you guys very much for watching. Comment below with any questions and I will answer them. And keep it rad. We'll see you in the next one.